At sunrise, the arena was already awake. Stone arches caught the first weak light. Yesterday's blood still darkened the sand. Vendors shouted before the crowd even arrived. Beneath the seats, animals were shoved into cages. Lions with ribs showing. Panthers clawing iron. From the tunnels came the sound of blades striking metal. Not in practice, but in testing. By mid-morning, tens of thousands would be here. Not for sport, for death dressed as ritual. Rome did not stumble into this. It built it. The arena was not entertainment. It was a tool. A place where fear was organized, cruelty was rehearsed, and loyalty was measured by applause. I'm Marcus, and what you're about to hear is how Rome learned to turn suffering into policy. It started quietly, almost privately. Not in a grand arena, not with trumpets or banners. It began at a funeral. In 264 BC, the sons of a Roman noble chose blood over prayers. They armed 6 enslaved men and forced them to fight to the death in a cattle market. The air smelled of smoke and waste. This was not a show. It was an obligation to the dead, a belief that spilled blood could satisfy restless spirits. Rome borrowed the idea from older cultures in southern Italy. In Campania, warriors were killed at graves to honor the fallen. Over time, the killing shifted into combat. Death became structured, controlled, watched. What mattered was not skill, it was sacrifice. 2 men entered, 1 left. The dead were honored. The living learned a lesson. Power could command life itself. Roman elites understood this quickly. A tomb with gold showed wealth. A funeral with blood showed dominance. As Rome expanded, so did the ritual. Former enemies shaped the fights. Samnite armor, Thracian blades, Gaulish swords. Each duel replayed conquest in miniature. Watching a Samnite fall was watching Rome win again. By the 3rd century BC, these fights slipped from funerals into public festivals. Officially, they honored the gods. In reality, they steadied politics. Leaders learned that violence distracted hunger and softened unrest. The Senate pretended it was tradition. The crowd knew better. These were gifts, violence paid for with public money. Loyalty bought with death. Temporary wooden stands rose, then collapsed, then rose again larger. Eventually stone replaced wood. Amphitheaters became permanent. The blood did not wash away. It soaked in. The games no longer belonged to families. They belonged to the state. Every match carried a message. Rome commanded men. Rome commanded death. Fighters were no longer just victims. They were symbols. Each blow told the crowd who ruled and who obeyed. The arena trained people how to feel, when to cheer, when to look away, when silence was dangerous, and men were not the only ones dragged into this machine. Rome wanted more. Novelty mattered. Shock mattered. Soon the sand filled with creatures hauled from the edges of the world. Lions from Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, bears from the forests, crocodiles dragged from the Nile. They were not admired. They were hunted. Romans called it the venations, the hunts. But these were not contests. They were demonstrations. Proof that the empire could seize nature, cage it, starve it, and kill it for pleasure. When the great amphitheater opened in AD 80, thousands of animals died in weeks. Lions weakened before release, bears driven mad with hunger. Elephants butchered to erase old fears. Behind every beast stood a supply chain of suffering. Trappers, caravans, ships, all to deliver living trophies to die on command. The crowd roared, not because they loved animals, because every corpse confirmed the same idea. Nothing was beyond Rome's reach. Not land, not people, not the wild itself. Power in the arena depended on imbalance. Rome did not want fair fights. Fairness limited control. The matches were designed to tilt, to humiliate, to remind everyone who decided the rules. Prisoners were dressed as fools and handed wooden weapons. Veterans faced them with steel. The outcome was never in doubt. The crowd laughed as men stumbled and died. It looked like comedy. It was execution. Even trained gladiators were trapped inside systems built for tension, not justice. Weapons were chosen to clash. not to equalize. One man carried a net and trident, another wore a smooth helmet meant to deflect that net. Every move became a gamble stage for suspense. Skill mattered, but design mattered more. The arena was a puzzle, where the answer was always blood. Sometimes one fighter faced many. Other times entire groups were thrown together, like miniature armies. The sand turned slick. Bodies piled. There was no pause. When novelty faded, Rome pushed further. Women were brought into the arena. Gladiatrices fought in public, not as parody, but as proof that no boundary was sacred. Writers mocked them, but the message was clear. If the crowd demanded it, anyone could bleed. Armor itself became punishment. Some helmets narrowed vision until fighters could barely see. Others weighed so much that lifting the head drained strength. Protection was optional. Suffering was not. The crowd watched men stagger half-blind, swinging wildly, while laughter rolled down from the stands. Control worked best when it looked entertaining. By midday, the tone shifted. This was the hour of punishment. Combat gave way to theater, and theater to terror. Condemnation to the beasts was not a sentence, it was a script. Criminals, deserters, slaves, prisoners of war were dressed as mythic figures and pushed onto the sand. Their crimes were matched to their deaths. Thieves torn by wolves, arsonists burned alive, traitors fed to lions. Every killing carried a lesson written in flesh. Animals were starved before release. Hunger made them unpredictable. That uncertainty thrilled the crowd. Would the beast kill fast or linger? Either way, the noise rose. Some victims were forced to reenact myths. Orpheus torn apart, Prometheus chained and devoured. These were not stories anymore. They were parodies soaked in blood. Rome took its own legends and used them to humiliate the condemned. Crucifixions happened in full view. Men and women nailed to wood, while vendors sold wine. Some were dressed in pitch-soaked tunics and set on fire. Living torches. The smell carried through the stands. Children watched. No one stopped it. This was not excess. It was policy. Fear worked best when shared. Philosophers noticed the cost. Some admitted the games hardened them. Others warned that watching cruelty trained citizens to accept it everywhere. But their voices were small. The crowd wanted punishment. Rulers delivered it. The arena was not about justice. It was about obedience. Each scream reminded Rome, what happened when you stopped applauding? Rome kept escalating because escalation worked. When blood stopped shocking, scale replaced novelty. Emperors wanted oceans where none existed. They wanted fire, water, and bodies moving on command. Mock naval battles answered that hunger. Thousands of captives were marched into flooded basins, forced onto real ships, handed real weapons. They were told to fight until one side sank. There was no rescue, no surrender. Wood splintered, men drowned screaming beneath cheers. The water turned dark. Rome watched from stone seats and called it spectacle. These events were not accidents of excess. They were deliberate displays of reach. If Rome could summon fleets inside a city, it could bend the world itself. Engineers dug channels. Aqueducts fed basins. Entire lakes were drained for a single show. Nature became another servant. The message never changed. Power was limitless. Resistance was pointless. Fire joined water as a tool of theater. Victims were dressed in pitch-soaked garments and ignited in public. Their deaths were framed as myths. Heroes burned alive, while the crowd laughed at the inversion. Courage became mockery. Pain became humor. Even bravery was no longer safe from control. Architecture itself served cruelty. Beneath the arena floor, lifts, cages, and trapdoors waited. Animals erupted from the ground without warning. Men vanished into pits. Water flooded the sand one day and drained the next. Engineers turned death into a schedule. Cruelty became efficient, repeatable, predictable. As the system matured, the line between rule and obsession blurred. Emperors used the arena to stage themselves. Some entered dressed as gods. They hunted weakened animals. They fought opponents who were not allowed to strike back. Victory was guaranteed. Applause was mandatory. Silence could be fatal. The crowd understood this. They clapped to survive. When animals ran out, people filled the gap. Spectators dragged from seats. Prisoners substituted mid-show. The arena consumed whoever was nearest. It no longer needed justification. Fear carried it forward, on its own momentum. Even rulers praised as capable were not immune. Victories were celebrated with weeks of killing. Thousands died to mark success. The body count became a measure of greatness. The state bled itself to fund these displays. Treasuries emptied. Officials looked away. To stop feeding the arena was to risk unrest. Bread and death kept the city calm. Not everyone approved. Some writers confessed the shows changed them. They entered curious and left colder. Repeated exposure dulled reaction. Suffering became normal. That was the real achievement of the arena. It trained people to accept pain as background noise. Violence stopped shocking. It started reassuring. As borders strained and money thinned, the shows shrank. Animals became harder to find. Funds dried up. The crowds drifted. The great structures remained, but their purpose faded. Stone endured. The noise did not. By late antiquity, the sand lay quiet. Weeds pushed through cracks, where blood once soaked in daily. But the lesson survived the collapse. The arena showed how power maintains itself. When fear is public and pleasure is tied to punishment. It showed how cruelty can be organized, justified, and cheered. Rome did not fall because of the games, but the games revealed something brittle at its core. A society trained to applaud suffering eventually loses the ability to recognize its own. Walk those ruins now and they seem calm. Birds nest where cages once stood. Light falls gently on broken arches. It is easy to admire the stone, harder to confront what it trained people to enjoy. Rome mastered spectacle for a time. That mastery looked like strength. In the end, it hollowed the city from the inside, leaving silence where the crowd once roared. By the late 1st century, the arena had stopped pretending. It served justice or tradition. It served appetite. The crowd did not come to witness outcomes. They came to feel control without responsibility, to sit above suffering and know it would never touch them. That illusion mattered more than law. Executions grew more elaborate because simplicity no longer satisfied. Death had to surprise. It had to humiliate. Prisoners were no longer killed plainly. They were dressed, scripted, transformed into characters meant to fail. Myth became a weapon. Heroes were rewritten as fools. Their deaths were punchlines delivered with teeth and claws. One man was cast as Orpheus, the musician who charmed animals. In the story, beasts listened. In the arena, a bear tore him apart mid-song. Another was strapped into wings and pushed into the air as Daedalus. He fell screaming. The crowd laughed at the lie of flight. A woman was forced to reenact a cursed myth involving a bull. The boundary between execution and degradation collapsed. Shame became part of the punishment. The state did not just kill bodies, it dismantled identity. These scenes were not mistakes. They were carefully planned. Poets recorded them. Officials approved them. The audience expected them. Rome learned that fear worked best when wrapped in spectacle, when violence felt clever, when pain looked earned. Emperors fed this hunger because it protected them. As long as the crowd focused downward, it did not look up. Rulers who feared unrest gave the city blood. Some entered the arena themselves, not as equals, but as untouchables. Animals were crippled beforehand, opponents disarmed. Victory was staged. Applause was forced. The performance said one thing. Power was invincible. When supplies ran low, standards dropped. If animals died too quickly, people replaced them. If prisoners ran out, spectators were seized. The arena did not pause. It consumed what was available. This was not chaos. It was entitlement. The system believed it was owed bodies. The moral cost spread outward. Writers noted how repeated exposure dulled reaction. Men who once flinched learned to watch calmly. Children grew up with screams as background noise. Punishment became entertainment. Entertainment became expectation. Violence lost meaning. That was the real transformation. Not cruelty, but normalization. Economically, the games bled the empire. Exotic animals vanished from their homelands. Treasuries emptied to fund spectacles that lasted days and left nothing behind but corpses. Each ruler tried to outdo the last. Restraint looked weak. Excess looked generous. The state trapped itself. Stop the games and risk unrest. Continue them and drain resources. Either way, the damage compounded. Some spoke out. Philosophers admitted the arena corrupted character. Early Christians condemned it outright, seeing in it proof of moral collapse. But dissent was easy to ignore. When drowned by cheers, the crowd decided what mattered. And the crowd wanted more. Eventually, reality intervened. Frontiers cracked. Money thinned. Logistics failed, became scarce. Shows shrank. The great structures stood, but their purpose faded. By the time the empire fractured, the arenas were already ghosts, silent shells built for a hunger that could no longer be fed. What remained was the lesson. The arena revealed how a society trains itself, what it rewards, what it laughs at, what it accepts as normal. Rome did not invent cruelty. It systematized it. It turned pain into policy and applause into consent. And once a culture learns to cheer suffering, it loses the tools needed to stop it. The stones still stand. They are impressive. They are easy to admire. Harder is to face what they taught generations of people to enjoy. The arena was not Rome's strength. It was its confession. Long after the last roar faded, Rome still carried the arena inside it. Violence had been rehearsed too many times to disappear cleanly. The habits it trained stayed embedded in daily life. Disputes hardened. Punishments grew harsher. Mercy looked suspicious. When people are taught that suffering is normal, restraint feels unnatural. The arena did not only shape crowds, it shaped rulers, emperors, learned that attention mattered more than law, that fear was faster than trust. When authority wavered, spectacle filled the gap. The games became a reflex, a way to quiet unrest, without solving anything beneath it. Every execution postponed questions it could not answer. As the empire strained, contrast sharpened. Frontiers demanded soldiers and supplies. Cities demanded bread and blood. There was never enough for both. Officials cut corners. Animals arrived sick or not at all. Shows shortened. Recycled acts returned. The crowd noticed. Disappointment replaced awe. When spectacle loses novelty, it loses control. Religion shifted the ground further. Christianity spread through cities and households, offering a worldview that rejected public cruelty. Martyrdom inverted the arena's logic. Those meant to be humiliated became symbols of conviction. Executions meant to terrify, sometimes inspired. The crowd did not vanish overnight, but the meaning of death began to fracture. Not everyone watching saw the same lesson anymore. Laws followed belief. Gladiatorial schools closed. Funding shrank. Executions moved out of public view. By the 5th century, formal games ended. Not because Rome became gentle, but because it could no longer sustain the machinery. The system collapsed under its own weight. What once looked eternal proved expensive, fragile, and replaceable. The structures remained. Massive stone shells stripped of purpose. They were reused, scavenged, ignored. People lived around them, not inside them. Memory softened. The blood dried. Tourists would come centuries later and marvel at engineering, at arches and vaults and scale. They would take photos. They would admire endurance. What is harder to admire is intention. The arena was never neutral. It trained perception. It taught people where power sat and how it spoke. It rewarded applause over empathy. It turned obedience into entertainment. That lesson did not vanish with the empire. It resurfaced wherever punishment became performance again. You can still walk those corridors. You can stand where cages once waited. You can imagine the sound rising, not as chaos, but as unity. Tens of thousands agreeing, together, on who deserved pain. That is the uncomfortable truth the ruins preserve. Not just that Rome was cruel, but that cruelty was shared. Empires do not fall because they are violent. They fall when violence becomes the only language they trust. Rome reached that point slowly, step by step, applause by applause. The arena did not kill the empire. It revealed what it had become. The silence today feels peaceful, but it is the silence after something learned too well. The lesson still lingers, etched into stone and memory. When suffering is framed as spectacle, it stops shocking. When it stops shocking, it spreads. And when a society stops flinching, it loses its last defense against itself. In the end, the arena outlived the people who built it. Not in use, but in memory. Stone holds shape longer than intention. What Rome created there was not just a venue. It was a method, a way to teach obedience without speeches, a way to make violence feel ordinary, even necessary. People like to believe they would have stood apart, that they would not have cheered. But the arena was designed to erase that distance. You sat among tens of thousands. You felt the noise move through your body. Silence marked you as dangerous. Applause kept you safe. Participation was not optional. It was learned. Rome did not collapse in a moment. It thinned, it hollowed. Systems built to impress stopped sustaining what they ruled. The arena kept demanding bodies, long after the empire could afford them. When the killing slowed, the illusion cracked. Power looked smaller without constant blood to inflate it. What remains today is easier to face as architecture than as warning. Arches, stone perfected by engineers. But those stones once trained people how to feel. They taught that suffering could be shared as pleasure, that punishment could be enjoyed.
These arches
if it
are
wore
not
the right
merely
costume.
for games.
That distance from pain
They are a
is
declaration
the same
to
as
the
innocence.
world of Rome's
That lesson did
eternal
not die with
strength
Rome.
and order.
It resurfaces whenever cruelty is staged and sold, whenever fear is turned into theatre, whenever people are taught to pray instead of question. The arena stands quiet now. That quiet feels earned. But it is not resolution, it is residue. A reminder of how easily a society can mistake control for strength and spectacle for unity. Rome believed it mastered both. What it really mastered was desensitization. And once a culture learns not to flinch, it gives up the one reflex that might have saved it. The stones do not speak. They do not need to. What they built already did the talking.